Hello and welcome to another episode of App Stories. Today's episode is brought to you by Mercury Weather. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Vitici. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm having a good day. I'm having a really good day. I don't know. How about yourself? What are you up there to over there in Rome?
I'm happy that I finally released Apple Frames 4 yesterday. We're
bet you
recording this
are.
on Tuesday. So yesterday on Monday of the previous week, since you're listening to this, I released Apple Frames 4. We're going to talk about that for the topic that we have in mind today. A topic that, in fact, was... anyway, I'm good, John.
All right.
Everything's fine.
Well, I'm glad you're good. I'm glad you're good.
But the topic today was inspired by something that you posted on Mastodon for Apple Frames 4. And I thought that was an interesting angle. So can you go over what you posted again?
Yeah, it's something that I've been thinking about a lot with some of these AI tools. And I after you posted about Apple Frames 4, I said that it was a really good example of the kind of multiplier effect you get when you have somebody who's really knowledgeable about a particular domain and you add Claude Code to the mix. Because I think that a lot of the conversations, and the reason I put this out there was that a lot of the conversations I see about AI and agentic tools is that they're used by people to be lazy, or they're used by people who don't know what they're doing. And the reality is, I think that they're most valuable when they're used by the people who know what they're doing the most. And in your case, that's creating shortcuts and dealing with Apple Frames, because you obviously have a long history of having brought this shortcut from the very first version in what was it, like 2018 or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's like 8 years ago. And you've evolved that from something that at one point was a lot more complex, and then you simplified it, and you just, from your own knowledge of shortcuts, brought it to a place that was a lot better than where it started years ago. But then you used Claude to not only help you with kind of refining aspects of the shortcut, but in particular, adding the CLI to it, which I think is something that probably you wouldn't do on your own, or if you attempted to do, would take you much, much longer than this did. And so it's one of those, that's why I see it as a multiplier. It's like, yeah, you already had this great shortcut, and Claude just helped you make it into something that was even better to be able to do all this stuff with CLI on top of that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like this angle is interesting because we often talk about the AI replacing humans, and which is a very real concern. It's a very much a real thing.
Yeah, it's a valid concern for sure.
It's a valid concern. And I mean, even if you just look at myself, I think I mentioned this on Unwind a couple of weeks back. In this case, for the making of Apple Frames 4, I did replace a human. I replaced Sylvia. She was really happy about it because she doesn't have to create the frame assets for me anymore.
Right.
But it's very much a concern, right? It's very much a thing that is happening. But what I think we don't talk about enough is exactly that idea, that multiplier effect of, well, what about though the AI sort of augmenting the humans, right? So you take any expert in any field and you give that person an AI that is capable of sort of multiplying the knowledge and the output of that person. Can that be a good thing? Can that be a nice thing? And we're going to talk about our personal experiences about this idea. And from my perspective, it's very much a real thing.
Yeah.
And it's actually kind of awesome. Like, if I can just jump right in and talk about Apple Frames, and then I have a few more other examples to share. So obviously Apple Frames, shortcuts that I started in, I think, 2018, 2019. And it started as a very simple way to frame screenshots for at the time, the latest iPhone and iPad. And that was it. It didn't even support the Apple Watch, I don't think. And over the years, this free shortcut that I just released to the masses because it was something that I really wanted, something that I really loved. And and I was hoping there would be some overlap, between me and the general public. And over the years, it became this very complex thing that is used by, I know that it's used by Apple folks. I know that it's used by thousands of developers. I know that it's used by MacStories readers, by all kinds of people who need a quick way to frame a screenshot for an iPhone, an iPad. And over the years, it became this very complex shortcut that supports multiple Mac models, multiple Apple Watch models, legacy iPhone models, going all the way back to the iPhone 12 mini, for example. And it, we're a version 4, and I have been through so many iterations of the shortcut. You remembered on Unwind that back in the day, the shortcut would store the image assets as base 64 text inside the shortcut, which made the shortcut editor go nuts when you tried to open the shortcut. And then over the years, I moved to iCloud Drive. So I know this system in and out because I have built it all and tore it down over the years and rebuilt it. I did all of this manually. And I did the same for Apple Frames 4 because about a year and a half ago, I had this idea because once again, the shortcut had spiraled out of control in terms of just the sheer number of actions inside of it. It was like 800 actions. And the brunt of it was this huge block of actions in the middle. There was multiple conditions, one within the other, that said, is the screenshot an iPhone 16 Pro? Is the screenshot an iPad Pro in landscape? Is like all these if conditions, one inside the other. It was impossible to browse, impossible to debug. And, Apple is releasing new iPhone models every year. They are not so precious about keeping the same device resolutions as they used to be back in the day. So every year there's a new display size that I need to support. And I also wanted to add support for colors, and I wanted to add support for device variants that do share the same resolution. And I was looking at the project and I was like, oh boy, this is just going to be impossible.
And we've got new computers and other devices, right? I mean, it's
new Apple Watches.
Lots of variables.
And I realized, well, I want to keep making the shortcut, but this foundation is impossible to work with. And so I came up with this idea of, rather than having these conditions, I would just build the shortcut around access to a JSON file that contains a complete map of all the resolution points in the Apple ecosystem. So instead of having to check for multiple if conditions, the shortcut simply opens the JSON file and says, 1200, this resolution width, what is it? And if it finds a match, it says, oh, it's a base model iPad in landscape. And so it's basically checking one time for one number. And there are some additional conditions. Some devices do share the same resolution width, but they have a different resolution height. So there is an additional check. But by and large, I removed 500 actions by simply saying, let's open this file once, and let's give it a number. If it finds a match, it means there's a device for that resolution. I did that whole sort of initial work manually, and then I stopped. Because I realized, well, okay, the theory works, but in practice, now I gotta create this JSON file by hand. and AI tools a year and a half ago were not nearly as good as they are today. We're talking Claude 3, right? Claude Code didn't even exist. And
that in and of itself is kind of remarkable when you think about the fact that we've come so far where like a year and a half ago, what you're describing wasn't even possible even if you knew what to ask.
Nope. I tried using the Claude chatbot for this, and it was hallucinating things. It had no idea what the shortcut syntax is like. It was hallucinating actions. It just was impossible. So I started putting it off. And over the past year, I've seen the progress on coding agents, and I've been thinking about, Apple Frames thankfully continued working for the iPhone 17 generation because it does have the same resolution as before. It just was framing those screenshots as iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max.
But
obviously it didn't support the Apple Watch Ultra 3, didn't support the MacBook Neo, and all those new devices.
The new displays that came out.
The new displays, And then a couple of weeks ago, I realized, well, you know what? I'm tired. I need to release the new Apple Frames. And I realized, well, now, however, I can take this coding companion with me and I can tell it what to do. I can give it instructions because I know exactly what the theory of it is. I just don't want to implement the practice manually. So
Right.
I'm going to have this little companion that is
Yeah.
going to take instructions from me,
Yep.
and the companion is going to take care of the boring work.
Yeah, it's busy work is really, I mean,
Yes.
you did the hard part of coming up with how it should work,
idea.
what the idea is and the structure and how to solve the problem, but you
Yes.
had Claude do it for you.
Yes. So I got to work, and it was a bit of a setup initially, because imagine transferring, and I think this is what the meat of the topic is. Imagine transferring years of your knowledge, distilling your own personal knowledge, the things that you know about any particular field. In my case, it's this weird field of framing screenshots. But imagine distilling 7-8 years of that into a prompt or a series of prompts for
Yeah.
an AI. It was a lot of explaining to do upfront.
Sure.
I knew immediately that I would have to turn all of this personal knowledge of mine into a reusable skill, right? So I created a skill that basically mirrors my knowledge. I had to tell Claude, okay, here's what this shortcut does. Here's what I want to do. Here's how the Apple ecosystem works in terms of display resolutions. Here's what some screenshots, John, need to be masked.
Right.
If you don't want a tiny bit of pixels peeking through the corners of a frame, you need to apply a mask that removes that bit of a screenshot peeping out of the corner of a frame.
Right.
Sylvia used to create those frame assets, those masks manually in Photoshop.
I remember.
I had to, and Sylvia hated doing that.
I
as a
still have
favor
some of
for
those
me.
masks on my computer somewhere.
I had to teach Claude how to create those, and it got it wrong many, many times. So I had not just to distill my knowledge, but also to distill Sylvia's knowledge into that. And eventually I got it to work. I got it all to work. And I got to a point where Claude, with the things that I taught it, was able to start adding support for new devices to Apple frames, such as the MacBook Neo, for example. And then when I got to the when I was basically in a good spot, I realized, well, okay, I have an updated shortcut, and I have this whole foundation. Why stop at a shortcut now? Why not also make a command line interface for Apple frames? And I sort of wanted, I obviously like all the things I do, I wanted to build this for myself, hoping that there would be some overlap with the audience. And the idea being that I knew exactly what I wanted to build in terms of a terminal interface. I had zero coding knowledge or skill to do it, right? So I guided the process of creating the CLI was very much me prompting Claude. And eventually I did use Codex for a final review of the whole thing from a security perspective.
That a lot too.
Yeah. But it was just me telling Claude exactly what to do, all the details. Like, the CLI has a feature, for example, that Apple Frames does not have because it would be very complex to add, which is batch mode. And batch mode lets you pass, 50 images, and you can do things like, I don't want to frame and merge all of these 50 screenshots together because it would just be a incredible horizontal image. But you can say things like, I want you to frame 5 screenshots per image, resulting in 10 images, right? So you're batching, you're doing a batch of 5, right? So every 5, it frames all the screenshots, merges them, and then moves on to the next 5. And so that feature is really powerful. And I imagine for developers who are producing a lot of screenshots, it would come in handy because you can automate the process of producing images with multiple iPhones or multiple Macs, but you're batching them. And it runs in seconds, right? So at the end of this process, I realized I have been able to build 2 things, the new shortcut and the CLI, using years of knowledge that I learned the hard way. I wouldn't have been able to do it without AI. But in the process, it's not just that the AI has learned from me. I have also learned a lot of things from the
Oh,
AI.
sure.
Like, and this is something that we have discussed on AppStories many times, I think. I have learned so much about how image composition works in Python, for example, that I had no idea. Because I do read through all the session transcripts, and I do read through some of the code, but I have also learned a lot. And so I think it's so fascinating to see how years of work that I've done before were able to be augmented and transformed in this new way of producing work
Right.
that I'm sure that Claude by itself wouldn't have been able to come up with Apple frames. But
Yeah.
me plus Claude, it feels like a really powerful combo.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Mercury Weather. Mercury Weather is a thoughtfully designed weather app that shows all the essential weather details at a glance. It has a gorgeous, colorful interface that dynamically adapts to conditions, with a warm orange palette on a sunny day and icy tones on a cold day, or deep blue on a rainy night. Mercury uses a glanceable chart layout to present the hourly and daily forecast in a way that feels intuitive right away. There's a real cool feature for frequent travelers, too. Mercury's trip forecast feature automatically shows the weather at your destination right in your daily forecast timeline, so you always see the weather for where you'll be, not where you are. The design of Mercury Weather is what really attracted me to the app in the first place, and it really is outstanding. Everything's right there at a glance. It's absolutely fantastic. And when you're traveling, being able to see your upcoming forecast for where you're going to be and not where you are today back home is a real big benefit. I use that every year when I go to WWDC, so I know what kind of clothes to pack, even before I've left home. When the weather gets serious, Mercury offers storm and hurricane tracking too, with maps, live positions, forecast paths, cones, and intensity. Plus, it has widgets, so you'll be able to keep tabs on a specific storm or the closest one right from your home screen. Mercury Weather's gorgeous interface makes it a delight to check the weather every day, even on those gray and rainy ones. The app's business model is simple, too. There are no ads, and they don't sell your data. Mercury is available on all Apple platforms minus tvOS. You can download it today and use the standard features for free and upgrade to Mercury Premium to unlock all features. Just go to mercuryweather.app/appstories to download Mercury Weather now. Use the link in the show notes so they know you came from App Stories. That's mercuryweather.app/appstories. Try it out and get all the standard features for free. Our thanks to Mercury Weather for their support of the show. I think it's difficult to articulate this process, especially explaining it to someone who hasn't spent a lot of time with these tools, because I think it can be it's really intimidating at first. You worry about what is Claude going to do to your computer. I mean, I think you and I are well beyond that kind of thing because
At this point, yeah.
we've got backups. We're committing these things and pushing them to GitHub. And if something bad happens, we can always recover and start, where we last left off. So I've had some things happen that were not great, but you know what? I was able to recover from them because I anticipated them. And you're right. I think there is really this aspect of how these tools wouldn't have been able to create something like that CLI, but for the fact that you were able to steer it with your own personal knowledge. And I think this is something that I've thought about a lot for a couple of reasons. One is I don't think it's not as easy as a conversation about whether using AI is causing someone to lose their job or not, because for instance, a lot of the work that I've been doing behind the scenes with Claude Code to create things to help you and I run Mac Stories as a business are things that if I didn't have Claude Code, they just wouldn't be done. It's not that we would have hired someone. It's that they just wouldn't be done because neither one of us would have had the time for it. And that is part of what's exciting about them. I think for a lot of people, this is a multiplier that is allowing a small team to work like a big team when they couldn't afford to work like a big team. And so I think you have to be cognizant as you do this, like if you're now a small team operating like a big team, if that then leads to the income that allows you to hire more people, you should, put
That's a
that
great
money
point. That's a great
back
point.
into the system, right? And it might not be for the exact same thing, but like if a lot of what you and I are doing ends up making us more money for the company overall over time, I can see us in the future having then the ability to hire more writers, more creative people, more, doing more web projects, doing more with design. There's a lot of things we could do that we might not be able to do with our budget today. So I think that's like one aspect of it for me. The other aspect is I've been doing some native apps, and some of them are just for me. But I do think a couple of them I'm going to release, and I've taken my time with it because I'm very cognizant of the fact that I don't want to put something out into the world that I can't support and that I don't understand.
Yeah.
And so I've been very slow and careful in dealing with these apps, and I put them to the side for a while because I'm not in a hurry to do this. I'd like to do it. I mean, and it's one of those things too where it's like, well, okay, I could see somebody saying, well, John, you shouldn't do that. You're not a developer. Well, I have made apps and put them on the App Store. And when I put apps on the App Store before, I was pretty much a novice developer. And I don't think we should be telling novice developers, don't use things like Codex or Claude Code to help you become a good developer, because that's kind of defeats the purpose. That, these tools can help you up a learning curve. I think that someone taking Claude Code or Codex, building something that they don't know anything about, have never done, have no experience with, and putting it out into the world is not, it's negligent, basically. Yeah. That's not something people should do. However, I do know, because we see so many apps across an incredibly broad spectrum, everything from fantastic apps all the way down to kind of junk. All the time they're sent to us. I understand kind of where, there are people building who are new to coding, whose apps we're going to cover, and we're going to cover them because they're a good idea and they work well. And it doesn't matter to me whether they were built with the help of Claude Code or not. I think in the end of the day, you have to have a certain amount of trust in developers that they're going to build their apps in the right way. It really does come down to a system of trust, because so many of the developers that we cover are already using these tools, and we may or may not know it. And I think it's the group of people who are new to this field, and you and I have seen it. I mean, there is a whole new army of developers out there that are coming up through the ranks, young developers just out of school who are putting out apps, and a lot of them are really good and a lot of them are really bad. And I don't think that I think both those categories can be built with the help of something like Claude Code and still be and that aspect of it doesn't matter as much to me, because to me, that's just a tool. And it really comes down to whether people use the tool in an appropriate way or not. And as a user, how do you tell that? It's hard, but you can rely on places like MacStories for that. We test this stuff, right? We look at it, we try it, we make sure it works, and then we write about it. So I think that, I don't think it's much different than Xcode in that way. And that, that kind of rolls all the way back to me. Like, one, I have some developer experience. Two, I know apps really well. I mean, you and I can talk about apps till, the sun goes down and keep on going. And we understand all the APIs. We understand what's possible, what's not. And I think that I can build pretty good apps too. But like I said, I'm not going to do an app unless it's like to my standards, to the standards that I think people would expect from me and that I know works. And I hope that all developers are doing that, but not all of them are. But to me, that's just like not very different than someone like copying and pasting things from GitHub or Stack Overflow back in the day and calling it a day and put it on the store. That's always been that kind of what I would call sort of negligent development out there. It's just that most of us think of great apps and we think of something like things, and we don't have experience with those junky apps, but you and I, we do see them, and we kind of have a sense for the range. They're out there, and that hasn't really changed with Claude Code. But I do think that what's really cool about it for me is that these novice developers who are coming up through the ranks can move their way through that experience much faster and get to a place where they're doing much better work, much more quickly, which makes being a developer potentially a more viable job in the future, doing indie apps.
Yeah, my only concern is, like, if I look at myself and the sort of some of the projects that I'm just now starting to release that were made with AI. There's the Apple Frames CLI. Apple Frames itself the shortcut was also helped by Claude Code because of my other upcoming project, which is going to be the Shortcuts Playground.
Right.
I'm just now, after a year of playing with these tools, I'm now starting to release all these things because I now feel much more comfortable knowing the ins and outs of these things.
Yeah.
But I was able to carry my existing knowledge and the things that I knew from 16 years of doing Mac stories, right? And so I sort of had that baggage of many years of ideas and notes and opinions and thoughts, and I transferred them into the coding agent, right? I worry that if you're a new developer starting off today, you're just going to prompt your way to a product without having built the necessary knowledge inside of you, right?
Yeah, and
To
no,
transfer
that's
that.
a valid concern. It's a very valid concern.
And that I also see every day on social media. I see people saying, today, for example, I saw somebody post, I clean my Mac, so the popular utility to free up disk space, a really serious task, right?
Yeah.
And I rebuilt it with Codex, free and open source. Go download it.
Oh God.
What?
But that's what I mean by negligent coding.
Like,
That's
that is
no one should do that.
That is a serious application that's dealing with your file system and sensitive data, like the entire file system, the entire drive of your computer.
Yeah.
And so I worry, and I just sort of eyeballed the project. It didn't seem like it's coming from a person with decades of experience in file systems. Like, if you ask me, if you told me, look, John Siracusa came up with a vibe coded utility about freeing up disk space and dealing with the file system. Now that I would trust, right? Because it's coming from a person that has been through the ringer of file systems and disk space for decades. And I worry that what we're going to lose is the idea of a person that accumulated knowledge and formed all this knowledge and notes and ideas and a baseline of what's okay and what's dangerous.
Yeah.
And instead, we're just going to have this new generation of developers that inherently trust what the AI tells them, right? Without having a pre-existing baggage of things that they already know, and things that they already know don't work or do work, and instead are just going to trust whatever Claude and Codex tell them. So that I do worry a little bit about.
Yeah, no, I do too, and I don't have a good response to that, other than we'll just have to see how it turns out. I do think though,
but also I don't want this to sound like gatekeeping. Like, I don't want to make
Well,
it
see,
sound
that's
like,
what-
you cannot be a new developer who releases vibe coded projects unless you are me, or unless you are John Circus, or unless you are a 40-something
Yes.
year old guy.
Yes,
No,
and that's the kind of thing where I hear a lot of gatekeeping in a lot of the
Yes.
arguments that I hear. I hear a lot of people who are either seasoned developers or people who have made it in some way or another, gatekeeping, becoming a new developer, and I don't like that personally.
Yeah,
But
I think maybe the solution is just to say, as long as you put in a lot of care and a lot of thought, and because you don't, so let's say you're a 16-year-old kid and you're really into this stuff and you want to release products, but obviously you don't have a 20-year-old experience in
Right.
programming and traditional programming even. Like, I'm not telling you that you shouldn't do it. I guess I'm just saying that because of your young age, um, it would be recommended to don't just prompt your way into an app and just release it out there. Like, put in the extra care, put in the extra thought, and
Well,
try and
and start simple too. I mean, you know what I've been seeing a
yes,
lot of people doing. I've seen an awful one thing that's really coming. I'm seeing a lot of these days are new menu bar apps that are really super simple. Like
yeah,
one I saw the other day was a task list that you just created a to-do list that you can get to from your menu bar, but all it really did was create a short checklist. And it's actually
yeah,
that's actually kind of
very
nice.
simple. Yeah,
It was like $1 or $2. It's not going to like erase your hard drive.
no,
It's
well, I don't think.
hopefully at least all you've got is a text list in your menu bar, and you can check off items. It just starts simple is what I would say. And I think what you pointed out is part of this conversation too, is that in doing the CLI, you learned a lot about how Python handles images and things like that. And I do think that people who are using these tools shouldn't be setting them up to do their thing and walking away. What they should be doing is understanding what's going on in the transcripts and getting a feel and an intuition for when things are going wrong, because they can go very wrong. And it's that experience and knowledge that you build up over time that when you can stop these tools from doing something that is a bad idea and getting you into some real serious technical debt. I had a situation like that happen just the other day, and I was like, told Claude, I'm like, you really started screwing this up. You got to stop doing this. And it was the thing we talked about recently, which is you really have to check the web for these things, because these were very specific HomeKit questions that applied to specific products. And I could tell just from what I knew that it was trying to apply some kind of general solution to something that just wasn't going to work that way. And so you got to know when to stop them. And is that more work? Absolutely, that's more work. But
And that also happens because you knew that, like, you already knew that was wrong.
yeah,
So once
yeah,
again,
no,
you steered the AI in a different direction.
exactly.
And that, I think, is this is the more fascinating work with AI from my perspective. Like, just prompting a thing and then let it go in auto mode. You never pay attention to it. I don't think it's interesting. What I think is interesting is this sort of combo of the human plus the AI. Like, that, I think, is the real multiplier. Not just saying, well, because I could open 10 windows, each with Cloud Code, and build 10 web apps and become the most prolific programmer ever.
Right.
But that's not interesting. And also, that's not really, I don't think that that's something that really leaves a mark. From my perspective, the best experiences that I've had were the ones where I was able to create something for me, and in other cases, something for the public, where it was a back and forth, between me and the AI. At least that's the way I like it to be.
Yeah, I think so too. I've been kind of the same way, and that's one reason. That's one reason I've enjoyed using the Superpowers plugin that I've talked about on the show before, because it has a planning mode where it creates a spec after asking you a bunch of questions, and the Q&A query part of the process is actually very valuable because it makes you think about what it is you're trying to do instead of just having some kind of vague prompt. And then once you have the spec, you read through it carefully, and it almost always, I come up with something. I'm like, oh, you know what? I didn't really think about this or that. And I go back and I kind of refine it. And eventually we get down to coding. The other thing I want to, here's something like maybe a topic to leave people with that I think is really interesting from a development standpoint, which is, one of the things that I've found recently that I've really enjoyed doing, and I think it's been valuable, is using coding agents as a way to, I guess, remotely control existing apps. In other words, what I'm saying is, instead of designing a native app from the bottom up, including a brand new UI, I've leaned on apps that have some kind of built-in automation tools, CLI, API, that kind of thing, so that what I'm automating and what I'm designing is a data flow that works with the way that I work, but I lean on the developer's design and UI, because first of all, coding agents still are not great at doing UIs. I mean, they're getting better, but there's still, and I know that there are like integrations with Figma and all these things that you can do, but I have not had as much, I think, success using agents to make UIs as I have with the underlying code. And so a lot of times, if there's a way to do that with build a native app into what I'm designing on the back end, that works a lot better. Of course, I think what like Claude Code is particularly good at, and the solution I end up using a lot of times, is some kind of web app, especially PWAs, because then I can just take the thing with me and I've got, some kind of dashboard or whatever I'm creating that I can use on the go. But
yeah, well, that was a really interesting sort of starting point for this conversation. I'm not really sure. I don't think
we've solved anything.
No, we're not solving anything. It's just more of a therapy session.
Well, and I think it's important to like raise these things because I think too often, and I think this is the age of social media that we're living in, where everything is binary. Everything is either good or it's bad, or it's, one thing or the other. And I think that there's a lot of nuance when it comes to this kind of thing, especially when it comes to using these tools for coding, where to me, the more I thought about it, the more I always come back around to trust. And I think you and I have a good instinct for that just because we've seen so many apps over the years. Like when we see that app come through the email from the 16-year-old kid, we're going to give it a closer look because it's not somebody who's a known quantity to us. We don't have an experience with prior apps they might have done, but we're still going to be open-minded to it and give it a try and make sure it's good. But it's one of those things. There's a lot of factors that need to be balanced. And I really feel like it really does come down to, if you want to be selling apps, the most important thing is gaining the trust of your customers. And that's what really we're talking about, I think.
Yeah.
All right, Federico. Well, good conversation.
Yeah.
We will, in the post-show, we've got some follow-up stuff to talk about. We got more. I've been working on a HomeKit project. I want to maybe tease a little bit. And we've got, and I also want to hear, I want to ask you what the worst thing an AI has ever done to one of your projects or one of your systems or something. I think we should share our horror stories in the post-show, okay? All right, everybody. Well, thanks again for joining us today, and thank you to Mercury Weather for sponsoring this episode of App Stories. We'll be back in another week. If you want to get that post-show and hear about our horror stories and what I've been working on with HomeKit, you can subscribe to AppStories Plus, which comes out a day early, has that bonus content in it, and is ad-free with higher bitrate audio. So check that out. Just go to macstories.net/appstories to find the details there. And we will be back next week. Federico and I are both on social media. Federico is at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.